Hello, and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. What's the deal with the Sunday school objection? Sunday school objection is my name for a common atheistic objection to the existence of God or Christianity or Jesus or going to church or any of those religious activities as an adult. And essentially, the objection is look, um, belief in God and in Jesus, that's okay for little kids. In fact, you probably should send your little kids to Sunday school so that they can learn about God and Jesus and morality and learn how to be a good person, and perhaps even have them engage in the initial sacraments of, let's say, the Roman Catholic Church, such as uh, confession, first communion, even confirmation. But that as adults, we know all those things really aren't true, and there is no God, and Jesus is just a fairy tale, and is really no different than believing in unicorns or leprechauns or Santa Claus. And as adults, we've grown smarter and have outlearned these childish notions, and we don't have to believe in that anymore. But it's good to have that basic understanding of morality, and therefore we're going to send our kids to Sunday school to learn these things, even though later in life we don't consider them appropriate for mature adults. So that's the Sunday school objection. Um, where people get this idea that God and Jesus and religion and going to church is childish or is for children is beyond me, because in the history of the world that has never been true. Um, but I'm going to address this objection to show you that, in fact, the notion of God is a very mature notion and an adult notion, and it is certainly not a childish notion. It's true that if you believe that God is a childish notion, then your notion of God is childish. And you need a mature understanding of God. So, if you think God and religion and Jesus is childish, then it's your notion of these things that is childish and immature. Because these things are not childish or immature. They're not. They've never been. Um, all right, so why is the concept of God not a childish notion? Well, first, uh, the proof for the existence of God is um, an explanation for the existence of physical reality. It's the most profound philosophical question there is, which is, why is there something rather than nothing? Um, at its root, God is the answer to that question. The most profound question there is, the most adult question that one can ask. Now, I know some people think that this is a very childish question, but it's not. It's the most profound question in human history, and it's what motivated philosophers and even scientists and physicists throughout the millennium. So the first thing is you really need to understand that this is a deep, profound question, and it's a very adult topic. So God is really an answer to that question of why is there anything at all? Well, what caused physical existence or physical reality? And the best answer for that is God. God. Um, a second reason why God is not a childish notion is that God is the uncaused metaphysical cause for physical reality, who decides what to make real and what not to make real, of the infinite logical possibilities for physical reality. God is demonstrated through the 12 cosmological arguments for the existence of God, which are philosophical arguments proving God must exist. And I did an entire video on it, so feel free to watch that. But these are very um, complicated philosophical arguments, and you have to be very intelligent to understand them and to fully grasp the 12 cosmological arguments. So this is not a child's game. This is not a childish notion. You have to be an adult and highly intelligent to understand these philosophical questions and the answers to them. You have to use a great deal of IQ and intelligence and logic and reasoning skills to grasp it. So this is far from a childish notion. This is a highly intelligent adult philosophical discussion about God's existence and philosophical proofs. So, second, you have to be very intelligent to understand what God really is. That is not a childish notion. Um, a third reason, the vast majority of adults believe in God. Um, last poll in the United States, it was upwards of 87% of adults believe in God. So the belief in God is not a childish notion. There are very few adults who don't believe in God. Um, so if you're an adult and you don't believe in God, you're in a very small minority of people. A fourth reason is that some people like to abandon their belief in God and Jesus and organized religion when they reach a certain age, let's say their late teen years, early 20s, because frankly, they want to engage in behavior that is considered sinful. Um, so it's easier to simply pretend that God is a childish notion and God doesn't exist than to deal with the central issue of whether you're behaving sinfully or immorally or badly. People don't like to think that they're behaving badly. So it's easier to throw God out than it is to accept the fact that they need to reform their behavior and think about the evil or the harm that they're doing. However, uh, somebody's desire to sin or commit evil or be immoral has no relevancy to the actual question and the validity of whether God exists and the 12 cosmological arguments. It has nothing to do with that at all. So those things, the 12 cosmological arguments, are independent of anybody's sinful behavior or desire to behave poorly, uh, and their motivation to abandon God because they want to do that. There's no relationship between the person's behavior and whether God actually exists or not. There's no actual logical connection between those two. It's not relevant. Whether you sin or not is not relevant to the question of whether the creator of physical reality exists. Doesn't impact that question in the least bit. It's not relevant. Or a fifth reason is you may have you may have a childish notion of God and believe God is like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, but your belief again doesn't actually impact whether God exists or not. God's existence is not dependent on your level of maturity or your understanding of God. It's independent of that. Whether you believe God is like Santa Claus um, doesn't matter to the question of whether God actually exists. God exists whether you like it or not, or whether you think it's a childish notion. Your belief that it's a childish notion doesn't matter. God is an objective reality, and your belief on the matter is irrelevant as far as his existence goes. The sixth reason why the notion of God is not just for children is that some of the greatest minds in human history have devoted a tremendous amount of effort in studying the question of God and the existence of God. These great minds are surely smarter than you. Do you think they were wrong about this question? You think that you got it right and it's a childish notion, even though these great minds in history didn't think it was a childish notion? You think you're right? You're not. You're not right at all. Some of the great minds in history um, studied the question of the existence of God and studied God and certainly considered it a highly intellectual adult philosophical pursuit. So there's no way God is a childish notion, or Jesus, or Christianity, or going to church. There's no way that that's a childish notion. Some of these great minds include Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. And by the way, if you don't know who these people are, then you don't have a very sophisticated philosophical understanding of things in general. So maybe you should look these names up and find out who they are and what they believed. These are some of the history's greatest philosophers. So, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, Augustine, Anselm, Maimonides, Aquinas, Descartes, Kant, Leibniz, William James and Rousseau. Etc. So these are just some of the great names and minds of history that have said a lot about whether God exists and God in general. Um, and these people are surely smarter than you. Seventh, another reason. Um, a great deal of human history and culture derives from a belief in God. Over thousands of years. This is an extremely adult enterprise to shrug off God and religion and Jesus and churches just for kids is truly ignorant of world history and philosophy and thought. It really is. You really have a lot to learn still. Um, Human history and culture impacted by the existence or belief in God includes, um, actually, it starts off with the very notion of civilization itself. You know, what caused civilization? Well, civilization was caused by people first living in cities. And what caused people to first live in cities? How did they know to congregate in these buildings and create cities? And it started with people building temples to their gods. So they would build this temple on a mound somewhere, and people would come periodically, maybe on the summer solstice, and they would worship their deities at this permanent stone structure, oftentimes. And that aggregation of people staying in one location, using this stone shelter, was the genesis of the idea of cities themselves. So all civilization is derived from religion, the belief in gods and the creation of temples to worship those gods. But in particular, the Judeo-Christian God has had an immense impact on world history and culture over thousands of years. I mean, you can go back to uh, the Roman Empire and Emperor Constantine, the first Christian Roman Empire, and all that he did. And then you had the Byzantine Empire after the fall of the Roman Empire, and you had the Holy Roman Empire of Charlemagne and medieval European history. Um, and Christianity was a was essentially the foundation of Western civilization and the building of churches and the organization established by the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican, um, and all the learning that went along with that, and the art and the philosophy and even the science that Christianity has given the world through, let's say, Galileo, who was a Christian. Um, so, and the Renaissance flourished in a Christian atmosphere. Um, Not to mention, Islam is also a religion of the Judeo-Christian God, the uncaused metaphysical cause. And there have been Islamic empires as well that have been vastly influential in the last couple thousand years. And, the establishment of Mecca and the Ottoman Empire and all the Islamic intellectual and philosophical learning that has occurred over the past at least 1,000 years. So if it's far more likely that your understanding that God and Christianity and religion is for children, it's far more likely that you're wrong than everything I just told you is historically inaccurate or wrong. So, if you think the Sunday school objection is a valid objection, then you're truly ignorant of human history and Western civilization and the developments of philosophy and great thinkers in our society and culture over time, and the foundations of Western civilization and the Vatican and Islam and the empires over time that they created. You need to start studying these topics, and then you'll realize that the belief in God is not childish in the least bit, not at all. And just look at my video on the 12 cosmological arguments, and you'll understand how much intelligence and how much of a high IQ is necessary in order to understand these arguments and to understand the uncaused metaphysical cause that we call God. So try to try to learn as much as you can, and I hope this video is a start for you. And realize that the notion of God being childish that's an absurd notion. It's absurd. And if your notion of God is that it's a childish notion, then your notion of God is childish. All right. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Please press the subscribe button. I appreciate it. And go out there and study these things and start to learn some stuff, some history and some philosophy, and so that you have some better understanding of why there's all these churches on every corner. Take care. And why you should go to them.